Thank you for joining this episode of Real Talk, Real Trust. I'm here with Eric Fullerton, a good friend and probably a brother from another mother based on our appearance today, a longtime friend and colleague from my days at Acquia. We're going to talk about optimizing the buyer journey in the age of AI, and I couldn't think of anyone better to join us today than Eric. The promise of this series is how do you build trust in the age of AI? Trust is the currency that helps you build deep relationships with your customers, and it's getting more and more complex. So we're trying to provide clarity for digital experience leaders on how to navigate this new age of AI and make sure you're forging those deep customer relationships. So without further ado, Eric, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, a little bit about your career path and why you decided to join today.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Eric Fullerton. I'm currently Vice President of Product Marketing at a company called project44. Project44 is a supply chain technology company. Cut my teeth at Acquia and Akamai. This topic is near and dear to my heart. Actually, I got my start in the tech marketing space in content. I was a content writer. I was doing global campaigns and marketing. I moved into product marketing from there. And that it's still such an integral component to how you bring messaging, products, your persona, and really the company, like the ethos of the company to market. So I think it was an easy call, man.
Yeah, thanks for joining me, Eric. We like to kick off with just a quick rapid fire to get our audience engaged and just hear your perspective on some high level things, marketing and customer experience. So the rapid fire is something that is a little tricky because you can only give one word answers without explanation. So we're really trying to put you on the hot seat a little bit. So I'm going to start with a few questions. Should marketers be specialists or well-rounded?
Specialist.
What can't be neglected in a buying cycle? A technical buyer or a business buyer?
Business.
Are traditional marketing tactics like direct mail and calls, phone calls, leaving voicemails, are they dead or alive?
Alive?
If you had to pick AI for creative assets or AI for copy?
Creative.
Love it. You want to give any context on any of your answers?
I want to give so much context.
Yeah, you only get one. Pick one that you want to give context on.
Okay. I think marketers, well-rounded or specialists, it's the way I would think about this is if you are in marketing and maybe you're earlier in your career, you're trying to figure out which direction you want to go. The reason I answer specialist is because if you are a marketer or you're really any background, if you can identify, what is your secret power, your special sauce, whatever that is, what is that muscle? And I'm not thinking about traditional marketing functions like demand gen, product marketing. I'm talking analytics, project management, writing, presenting. What is that thing that you seem to do better than your peers, and then exercise that muscle ruthlessly, and the generalist component will come.
Yep, absolutely. I loved your answer because I think that's right. You know, in a world that has so much complexity, specialization is going to become more and more important. And actually, one of your areas that you grew in terms of specialization, you talked about content. You talked about product marketing. Sort of the company messaging and fit. But that all ties into the buyer journey, and it's sort of a buzzword topic. How do you, as a product marketing leader, as someone who's been in the space for a long time, how do you define the buyer journey?
It's a great question. The buyer journey is, at its simplest form, the method that people who are interacting with your company use to find out who you are and whether they want to use you. Like it's complicated, but it's simple in the way that it's just how they want to interact and experience with you.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons, that was a perfect definition. One of the reasons it's become such a hot topic is because it's become more and more complex, right? How the buyer journey, 15, 20 years ago, it was linear. There was only so many channels. And that's what made it was about relationships and how you built those relationships. And then this term of buyer journey became more and more prevalent. I'm curious for you and the different roles that you've had. If someone says we need to improve the buyer journey, what does that mean to you to the organization? And then what was the expectation for you as a marketing leader?
Yeah, I mean, the first answer I would give is, what do you mean by that? Because I think sometimes we don't diagnose problems properly. Like you could say, our buyer journey is broken, and then you play the 5 whys, and you're like, why? Well, people aren't converting at the last stage. Why? It's like the material that we have there, it's good, but I don't think we're meeting them where they are. Why? We don't really have experience in that channel. Why? Right. And then all of a sudden you start to actually diagnose the problem. So I would play that annoying but effective exercise of, what are we actually trying to solve and fix? Are we trying to solve a problem that our message at the top level isn't resonating? Are we trying to solve the problem that we actually don't know what channels our buyers prefer to engage on? Are we trying to solve the problem that the content type that we are providing them is not effective? And if you think in those 3 terms, like that's how I orient it, right? It's like, what's the topic and message, the content type, and the channel? Is it a problem with one of those 3 and all of those 3? Is it we can't get anyone in, or we can't drive them through? We can't get them to close? You have to be really prescriptive, and you can't let the buyer's journey, which is as you said, it's a buzzword, it's a big topic. You can't let it be a big topic, right? You have to have specificity, put a magnifying glass on it, because if you don't diagnose the problem properly, you can't fix it.
Yeah. I think what you're alluding to in many ways, Eric, is like, how do you engage with your customer? What is the way? What is the way? What is the channel? What is the tactics that they want? That where they want to be met in terms of how they discover and understand who you are as an organization. And that, I think I have a hunch what you'll say, but at a high level, when you think about the buyer journey and then the metrics that come from that buyer journey, what do you typically get measured on? Say, hey, is our buyer journey effective? And how do you think it should be measured, the buyer journey?
Yeah, I think the measurement is, for a marketing team,
Yeah.
is pipeline, stage 2 pipe into conversion into opportunities. But really, I think the primary measurement is pipeline.
Yep.
What should it be measured on? I mean, how long do you have, I suppose, is the answer, but there's a lot of different components. I don't think it's that easy. And then I think it's difficult when you're measuring marketing versus the business, because the buyer's journey, we think about it as a marketing thing. We create content and a flow and interact, but there is a sales component to that. There's a kind of relationship component to it outside of that, even sits outside of your organization. I think it is hard to measure. So when in doubt, the most important part is not, is it measured exactly the way with all the right metrics? Are we aligned on that it is stage 2 pipeline, as an example? Yep. And all the teams agree that that's what we're going to measure it on in terms of its effectiveness. And if yes, we can work with that. I think that clarity is more important than making sure you have 16 different measurement components analyzing the effectiveness of your journey.
Yeah, I think that's great, because I mean, intuitively, that there's not linear nature to the buying journey. Someone might come and do some initial research on your .com, then they might see you at a show. They might then, a few months later, when they're more in market, start to download a white paper, maybe engage with AI. So it's just this idea of like a buyer journey is not linear. So at the end of the day, it's like, how do you drive customer engagement that brings to pipeline? And so the only thing that I would add is, what's the precursor to pipeline to show that you have the right channels, the right distribution of all your content and experiences, is that there is an indicator that there's sort of there's an awareness about who you are, and people are starting to take initial steps. And then pipeline obviously should be the primary metric.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm thinking the numbers the business, the broader business cares about, because I think in marketing, we have a very bad habit of reporting on facts and figures that are important to us and not to the business.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't want to take us off topic, but when I was in my early days in buyer journey, content creation, marketing planning, we had the 5 stages, and you would build content, in different types in each of those stages as a framework. And you were like, here's how it goes. And then we would pass that out to global teams. And then our corporate team would run activities. And then we would have augmented things in different languages or specific to industries. And like, that's a good plan. I think it's well structured, but I don't think it reflects the modern day consumption of material, because what you just said is potentially true. Yeah, they might download a white paper or Gartner report. They might see you at an event. But what they might think is important to them, you might say, well, that's bottom of the funnel. We won't feed that to them. People will find what they want to find. The construction of the stages is something that we kind of made up. There are people that engage specifically with case studies, bottom of funnel content only. There are some that actually are looking for more awareness, thought leadership, like how should I think about this? Because they're already set on purchasing. They just want to articulate it to the rest of their business to validate the investment. And then there are some that are like, great, I know that we can do this. We're going to buy. I get it. But how are we going to actually build change management and action it at the organization? And then it tends to be those structured like webinar things or those kind of more deep dive how-to materials. And they may only engage with that style of content. So if you try to force them through something, that's not going to work. You actually have to just be incredibly available to them.
Yep. I love being incredibly available and not having a prescribed journey that you think they need to go through is something I love, because that goes to a big challenge that I think a lot of marketers have. How do you create the volume and depth of content, knowing that they could come in at any entry point? They just want the how-to content versus someone who wants the full spectrum of content that you create. And so you're missing opportunities if you don't have the power to deploy all that content, because if they come to you for the how-to content and you're one of two and they can't find it, it's gated. They have to go to someone within the company. That's risk. That's risk for that opportunity. So maybe that's a good segue into like, when you think about mapping out the journey, like what are the steps so you can kind of then define the content or experience that you want to deliver at each phase in the journey, whether it's they come through it systematically or they just come into one part. How would you advise customers to map out their customer journey? What are the steps they should take?
I think the first thing that I would do, and I'm going to imagine that I'm coming into a new org, I would look at what are the most successful campaigns, what are the most successful content pieces, and what are the most successful channels. I would then take that information, dig in a little bit more, like try to understand why, figuring out a little bit, hey, what actually has worked, dig into why. And that's probably how I would start my customized buyer journey, because I think that's the way it would have to be. Different industries. The industry I am in now is, freight logistics and technology. It's so different than kind of the digital experience, the content and CMS space. I had a bit of a rude awakening, and I can share my personal experiences. I came in and we need to do these types of interactive content pieces. We need more demo videos. We need to make sure that we have, more video format, period. These old school style, like webinar things, like that was my thought process going in.
Yeah.
I go in and I look at the results and I'm like, the amount of pipeline and opportunities that actually closed that were directly influenced or generated from something that I think traditional marketers may think of as a little archaic, which is a webinar, was the highest. And then I say, okay, you know what? I don't know everything. So then you kind of start to say, well, why? What works? What are the most successful blogs you've ever done? What are the videos that people have looked at? And then I think I tried to look at one or two buyer journeys that we were able to tag and essentially map. So when you have that, essentially what you're able to look at is say, all right, so we have someone who is a great customer. They became a customer. Now it's significant upsell, triple the ARR. What is their buyer journey at all those different stages? The interesting thing though, is you're retrofitting the stages, right? They're engaging, not thinking about awareness, consideration, or decision. They're engaging in their format. So then you kind of see, all right, well, there actually is a strong content play. And whatever our feelings are about Gartner, people love Magic Quadrants and they find them worthy of downloading, right? In a way that maybe some longer form assets, they don't. Okay. But there's also virtual events that we do. Great. We can bring those in. We find that. So that's maybe something that works. There's topical webinars, send them a gift. And then there's a lot of engagement across the board. So you look at a couple key journeys that you want to map to, and then you create those types of content, and then you roll it out and you see if your suppositions are correct. I think if you come in there with a rigid mindset of, I know the way that people are going to engage, I know how this is going to go, let's do this, let's flip everything around without analyzing the effectiveness of what's happening today, then you're going to be in 6 months wondering what the heck just happened.
Yeah, Eric, I mean, that is so good. And I think as marketers, we often will come in and say, here are the things that we know have worked. Here's the modern tech that we know can support how we create brand and trust. It's interesting. And I actually would be a little bit scared if we did a survey and we said, CMOs, folks who lead marketing groups, can you tell me for your top 10 accounts, what pieces of content, what type of experience they engaged with over the course of the life cycle of your engagement with them, if they knew what they were, right? And so that's starting with who spent money with you and what they engaged with, even if it's regardless of the stage, because that, like you said, that's a bit of a mystery. But knowing what has influenced their buying decision should impact the buying journey, and starting with those top 10 customers and knowing what they did is going to be critical. So I think that's great.
Yeah. Just to be clear too, I wasn't saying that the stages are irrelevant. I think they're actually helpful for marketing teams or marketing and sales, go-to-market teams, really.
Yeah.
Because they're context. But I don't think that anyone who is engaging with you is like, well, I've now consumed a consideration asset.
Right.
Therefore, I'm ready for the next stage. Like, they don't care, man. Right. So we might, because it helps us stay organized and manage projects and understand where we might have gaps. And that's helpful.
I agree. I think it's a good call out. I was going to ask, when you think about the buyer journey, one of the things that we continue to get asked by clients is, how is AI going to impact the buyer journey? How you deploy content, how you deploy experiences. From your view, what are the things that are going to be common or sort of table stakes in terms of how buyer journeys are utilizing AI? Maybe I'll start with that question.
Yeah. So I think there's a speed component to this. Let me start with where I care, where I am going to, I think or maybe the broader we will benefit most, which is better, faster, and more accurate performance reporting. So I think right now there's a lot of manual effort required to identify, like, what is that content type on that channel? How did it perform? And it takes a lot of time to not only generate the reporting and the analytics, but then to consume it and then to articulate it. And I think from my perspective, there's a taxonomy component to this. Like, hey, I don't have to go in and manually tag 700 pieces of content. Like, that could be really, really helpful. Understanding at a very broad swath, like, how should I be looking at the information so that I can create more of the right content and less of the not so right content. So I think the speed and iteration of, like, helping you pivot quickly if necessary is where it's going to be useful. And I'm not getting into the whole, like, AI copy content creative component. I'm thinking more on the back end. It's like, how can I analyze my current state quickly and more effectively? And there's definitely some tooling to help with that. And then how could I use that to make sure that I need to shift in Q3 and I can actually do it in Q3?
Yeah. I think that's great, Eric, because I think, as marketers, we create so much content, right? And sometimes we even forget what's out there. To be candid, there's tools that we have, and making sure that content is AI is surfacing the things that have performed the best. AI is surfacing ideas of what could get created next,
Right.
as an idea generation tool, looking at analytics. And AI is sort of built into the workflows. So some of the things that were manual, that required approvals, there's logic that can be utilized through
Yeah.
AI to streamline some of that.
Think about this. 8 of your top 10 highest performing content pieces include this topic and this channel.
Yep. 100%.
That's it.
Yep.
For that's where I think the value is most useful. And I like that. That's the dream.
Yeah. I think so too. Because it gives you the direction. Because there's always this question. I mean, correct me if you feel the same way, but what should we produce next? You have finite resources. Should we write about this? That is the how-to content. Do we need more of that? Or should we write about something that's top of the funnel, that's engaging them on the category, on the space? And so I feel like AI can give us a sense of where we should invest our resources to get the maximum return within that buyer's journey. Do you have any comments or thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's if you don't have that, it's just a bunch of thoughts and feelings.
Yep.
Yeah, sure, they're based on perspective, and I've seen this work at this company or this industry, and then you work with. In my instance, I have a demand gen leader. We collaborate with sales. They have thoughts and perspectives, and then I get 17 different thoughts and perspectives, and I try to organize those thoughts and perspectives into a big bucket of 3, and it doesn't really reflect any of them. And then all of a sudden, like, I would really like the ability to be prescriptive. And that's where I think this can really, really help, which is, I know you think that. Here's the results. Let's build more of it and see if the trend continues. Like, no, it's very hard to argue with that.
Yep. Yeah. And I was going to ask you, what role does AI driven content play in this scenario? But it sounds like, based on what you were just saying right there, is it can help you iterate. It can help you build what's next, but also not get too far ahead of yourself in terms of, let's prove out what we built. So any thoughts on how AI driven content can be used within that construct that you just shared, and any kind of benefits or things you would caution our listeners on?
We are in a very interesting time where people will say things to marketers like, what about just using ChatGPT? I'm like, okay, great. So there are some good things here. I think with content research, tools like ChatGPT and other models like that are incredibly useful, right? You can start to pull out statistics really quickly, pull out perspective. For things like, we are going to do an ABM campaign and we need 22 emails. You can say, hey, for each of the emails, I have a topic. You can port in a messaging. You can port in a topic for each of the 6. Say, write me one of those. And then it gives you something that's not a blank Word doc. And I think that's great, because we know there's a velocity component to this for any content creator that they need. And every time you stare at that cursor blinking on a blank Word document on your computer, you're losing time. So how do we mitigate some of that? The challenge with AI content as it sits today, AI created content. Well, I mean, first of all, I don't know if you can tell, but I can tell.
Yep.
And I think you eventually, at some point, you sacrifice speed for quality. You can sacrifice speed for authenticity, and you can sacrifice the speed for perspective. And it doesn't matter how much content you put out. If it doesn't have quality, authenticity, and perspective, then you could, 1,000 more blank content pieces aren't going to do you any good. That's not the problem. But in terms of the speed to help teams move faster, start with something. I think that there's definitely a benefit there.
Yeah, I agree. And then I think, that that's additional 1,000 pieces, depending on how they're deployed, like you mentioned in a campaign, it's you do run the risk of losing trust. If someone sees something and it's AI generated, and it's not noted that it's AI generated, it feels like it's disingenuous. So I think that's one of the biggest things in that whole journey, in the buyer journey, that we've talked quite a bit about, which is how do you decide where you can use AI and how much of it is left, for quote unquote left alone versus actually sort of guided, to have that depth of content, but not run the risk of someone looking at it saying, this is AI generated. This feels really disingenuous. It's actually put me off and within the buying cycle. And
Yeah.
so do you have any, maybe, this one is a little bit, it's something that came to me ad hoc, but do you have any ideas or sort of guidelines on where AI generated content can be used in the buyer journey, as close to as the output to a prompt versus something that really needs to be scrubbed and cleaned up and put a human voice on that content? When you think about the whole buyer journey, where is it kind of okay to be left as is and that's acceptable to a buyer versus where it needs to be used for ideation and then truly have some polish put to it? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think like when you think about like event or speaker abstracts, it's like pretty fun. And that's can be really annoying to write.
Yeah.
So there's those things. If you have like a webinar abstract and you're like, here's the theme, and you're writing, you're like, you know what? It's solid.
Yeah.
It's solid. Maybe you write your own title, but things like if you're putting on an event and you have, let's say, 45 different presentations over the course of 2 days, that's 45 abstracts, 45 titles. That's going to be publicly facing. I think you're probably going to be like 95% there. You say, here are the speakers, here's the topics, here's what's going to be covered. And can you write an abstract for that? That is a huge pain for me. So that's one of the things that I think is very, very close to the output because the expectation isn't super high.
Yep. Yep. No, that's a great example. One of the ones I thought also about is, for lack of a better term, bottom of the funnel, where it's how to. This is how the product works. This is how the integration works. And so if it's prescriptive, it's defined, it's usually okay if there's a baseline check. But if there's emotion that's involved, that there's, kind of depth and logic and a bunch of considerations, then it typically involves more human touch. And even something like you said, the events is great because you can give the high level and the depth of those sessions is in the discussion. And so, it's a big topic for us because one of the things we're always thinking about is how do you include everyone in the content lifecycle in order to deliver the right experience. And AI plays a big role in that, whether it's front-end components, whether it's, content that's being, copy that's being created. So it's this idea of content being a team sport coupled with AI layering in is something that's complicated, but it provides a huge opportunity. Eric, I know we're getting close to our time. There's one kind of fundamental thing that I didn't ask you about, which I want to get back to before I get your final thoughts, which is we talked about marketing's role in the buyer journey. When you think about collaborating with the different folks within your organization to make the best of the buyer journey and get to that stage 2 pipeline, which is the goal you talked about, who in your first few weeks at Project 44 were you like, I need to connect with this group or this person to make sure that we're aligned on how we optimize the buyer journey?
So when I first started, rather than just connect and interact with marketing people, I went right to the field.
Yep.
And I was fortunate to have some former colleagues who I could call up and be like, what's the deal? And they are very much as on the ground as you can possibly be. So getting that perspective was really important. I think product is always important, but I think that sales marketing connection is where I focused and I think helped a little bit. And then within, the broader marketing team, I think you think about, it was demand and field were the people that I immediately went to when those were the questions that I was trying to dig in with them.
Yep. Yeah. It sounds like you were trying to get voice of the customer. The voice of the customer is what should inform it, right? Like what is the customer saying on a regular basis or a prospect saying on a regular basis that we need to take and put back into our buyer journey and the content strategy that supports it, right? So that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Why did they care? Why did they come to us? Why did they choose us? What is it about us that actually matters or makes a difference? I don't want to look at what our, homepage said first.
Yep.
I wanted to look at what the reality might have been. And then, you build up to a message that's obviously bigger and maybe more compelling, and that's great. But I think you have to start with the truth, and then you can tell a compelling truth rather than just sounding like everyone else. And
Said by and said, not surprisingly, from one of the best product marketers I know, truth and compelling truth.
it's nice of you to say.
Yeah. Eric, I know we're close to our time. It's been awesome to have you, man. I just was going to ask, for someone who is in, let's say, a marketing leadership role, or, they're a customer experience leader, and they've been asked to optimize the buyer journey. We talked about a few different things, but maybe just one or two key takeaways for them, thoughts that they should use to frame up, how they would take on a project that was around optimizing the buyer journey.
Yep. So I think regardless of who you think should own it, right, you need an owner, like a singular point of contact who can think through this. Again, many instances, it's often demand gen. I think that probably is whether it be the leader or a specific member of that team, they're oftentimes the channel decision makers, the keeper of the results, right? So I think having a person is important. You think about the content component of that, that is really the engine that drives it all, right? So one quick piece of perspective. Don't let anyone tell you that you need a content audit. Those things take 6 months. It is the bane of my existence. I have a lot of strong feelings about content audits. What you actually should push for is tell me the top performing content, channel, and topic pieces that I have. I don't need to know exactly what our gaps are. We don't even know what we need to do next. And it doesn't really matter what our gaps are, because maybe our gaps are our gaps for a reason. And that's not the content that people are engaging with. So focus on the content performance and the analytics component of it. And then when you think about a team like product marketing, they are your special forces, right? They can be the brain behind some of that message and the keepers of the broader company message, and they can be enabled. And then field is an activation unit. So when you're thinking about within marketing, those are going to be some of your key types of players. The only thing I would say though is, if you do this in a marketing only ecosystem, there will be a time when you fail. And one of the things I've learned is that it's just better to stay a beat ahead and to get in front of it early. And we need to present this to sales, and we need to share it with them. And here's what we're going to do. Here's our plan. Yeah. The one that we presented to marketing was an hour. The one for sales, 7 minutes. And that's probably right. But if you don't get there, you don't get that buy-in, you don't go to product and say, hey, here's what we're doing, they're still not going to know how marketing works. They're going to be like, yeah, you guys make some videos and maybe the stuff on the website, and that was a nice event you put on. And, anyways, can I get an infographic? And that is 2007. We're a long way away. So get in front of it, stay a beat ahead, be crisp with your message, but make sure that you're communicating like, here's what we're doing, focus on the metrics, drive it with the team internally. And then, you do want to share some cyclical results as you roll out with those relevant partners.
Yeah. I mean, that was fantastic. I think our listeners being in a great spot to take some action. I love the content audit piece. I love the getting ahead of the journey with sales and with products, so they understand the macro pictures. I think that concludes our time for today. Just super happy to have you on. It's been awesome getting your thoughts, perspective, a veteran of the industry, one of the best people, one of the smartest marketers I know, Eric Fullerton. Thanks for joining Real Talk, Real Trust. It's been awesome to have you.
Pleasure to be here, man. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks to our listeners. We'll see you guys on the next episode, and you can catch us on Spotify or YouTube, and share this out with your colleagues and friends. Thank you.